September 11th, 1973. The streets of Santiago were unusually quiet. Then, without warning, the silence was shattered by the deafening roar of fighter jets slicing through the morning sky. Moments later, explosions echoed across the city. Flames rose from La Moneda Palace, the heart of Chile's democracy. Inside the burning building stood President Salvador Allende. He knew the military was closing in. He knew escape was almost impossible, yet he refused to leave. Within hours, one of South America's oldest democracies would collapse, and a dictatorship would begin. But was this simply a military rebellion? Or had the fate of an entire nation been decided long before the first bomb fell? This is the story of ambition, ideology, secret operations, and a Cold War battle that changed the course of history forever. Stretching more than 4,000 kilometers along South America's Pacific coast, Chile was unlike its neighbors. Rich in copper, blessed with fertile valleys, and home to one of the strongest democratic traditions in Latin America. For decades, Chile had earned a reputation as a nation where political disagreements were settled through elections, not violence. While military coups became common across Latin America, Chile seemed different. Its institutions were respected, its constitution appeared strong, its people believed democracy would always protect them. But beneath that calm surface, dangerous cracks were beginning to form. To understand Chile, we first have to understand the world it lived in. The year was 1970. The Cold War had divided the planet into two rival camps. On one side stood the United States, determined to stop the spread of communism. On the other stood the Soviet Union, eager to expand its influence wherever possible. Every election, every revolution, every political movement was seen as another battle in a global ideological war. Latin America had become one of the most important front lines. When Fidel Castro's revolution succeeded in Cuba, Washington viewed it as a warning. American leaders feared that if one socialist government could survive in the Western Hemisphere, others might soon follow. The next battlefield, they believed, could be Chile. Salvador Allende was not a soldier. He was a physician, a lifelong politician, and a committed socialist. For years, he had argued that Chile's enormous wealth was benefiting only a small elite, while millions struggled with poverty. His vision was bold. He wanted the country's major industries brought under national control. He believed copper, the backbone of Chile's economy, should belong to the Chilean people. He promised better healthcare, expanded education, higher wages, and a fairer society. To his supporters, he represented hope. To his opponents, he represented uncertainty. To Washington, he represented something far more dangerous: a democratically elected Marxist president. In September 1970, Chileans headed to the polls. The election was one of the closest in the nation's history. When the votes were counted, Salvador Allende had won a narrow plurality. Although he did not receive more than 50% of the vote, Chile's constitution allowed Congress to confirm the leading candidate. For supporters, it was a historic victory. For critics, it was the beginning of a national crisis. Across the world, newspapers rushed to report the stunning result. In Moscow, there was celebration. In Washington, there was alarm. American officials feared Chile could become another Cuba, this time through the ballot box rather than revolution. The political battle had only just begun. Not everyone welcomed Allende's victory. Business leaders worried about nationalization. Conservative politicians warned of economic collapse. Many ordinary Chileans hoped for reform. Others feared losing everything they had worked for. Families argued around dinner tables. Students filled university campuses with political debates. Workers organized demonstrations. The country was becoming increasingly polarized. And while Chileans argued openly in public, powerful people were already making decisions behind closed doors. As Salvador Allende prepared to take office, events were unfolding far beyond Chile's borders. Meetings were being held in Washington. Secret conversations were taking place inside intelligence offices. Plans were beginning to emerge. Plans designed not to win an election, but to prevent a president from governing. In this, we'll uncover the covert operations, political pressure, and secret decisions that transformed Chile from a democracy into the center of one of the Cold War's most Salvador Allende had won the election. The people had spoken, but behind closed doors, another battle was already underway. Thousands of miles away in Washington, D.C., powerful officials were asking one question: how do we stop Chile before it's too late? This was no longer just about one country. It was about the Cold War, about influence, about ideology. and about preventing what many American leaders feared would become another Cuba. The fight for Chile had entered the shadows. When news of Allende's victory reached the White House, concern quickly turned into urgency. For American policymakers, Chile wasn't just another nation, it was a strategic piece in the Cold War. If a socialist government succeeded through democratic elections, it could inspire similar movements across Latin America. That possibility worried officials in Washington. President Richard Nixon and members of his administration believed that allowing Chile to move further towards socialism could weaken American influence throughout the region. As a result, discussions began almost immediately about how the United States should respond. Some favored diplomatic pressure. Others believed stronger measures were necessary. As political leaders debated their options, the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, was given a larger role. Its mission was not to invade Chile. Instead, it focused on gathering intelligence, supporting friendly political groups, and monitoring developments inside the country. Over the years, the United States had already provided financial support to political parties opposed to Allende during earlier election campaigns. These activities were part of a broader Cold War strategy used in several regions around the world. The goal was simple: strengthen anti-socialist forces, limit Soviet influence, and protect American strategic interests. But after Allende's victory, the stakes became much higher. Not every conflict is fought with bullets. Some are fought with newspapers, radio broadcasts, political speeches, and public opinion. Inside Chile, newspapers critical of Allende warned that his economic policies would damage the country. Supporters argued that change was necessary to reduce inequality. Opponents claimed those reforms threatened democracy and private property. The political atmosphere became increasingly tense. Every headline, every speech, every protest deepened the divide between Chileans. The nation was slowly splitting into two opposing camps. At the same time, Chile's economy began facing serious challenges. Inflation increased. Consumer goods became harder to find. Businesses grew uncertain about the future. Foreign investment slowed. Historians continue to debate how much of this crisis resulted from Allende's domestic policies and how much was intensified by external economic pressure. What is clear is that ordinary Chileans felt the impact. Long lines formed outside stores. Families struggled to buy basic necessities. Public frustration continued to grow. Inside the presidential palace, Allende refused to abandon his vision. He believed Chile could achieve social change through democratic institutions rather than violence. But governing became more difficult with each passing month. Political compromises became harder. Street demonstrations became larger. Opposition parties became more determined. Meanwhile, sectors of the military were watching events unfold with increasing concern. Although Chile's armed forces had traditionally stayed out of politics, that tradition was beginning to weaken. The country's future had become dangerously uncertain. By the end of 1972, Chile was no longer facing only political disagreement. It was facing a national crisis. The economy was under pressure. Mass protests filled the streets. Trust between political rivals had almost disappeared. And behind the scenes, some military officers had begun asking a question that would change history forever. Should the army remove the elected government by force? We'll explore the growing unrest, nationwide strikes, military conspiracies, and the dramatic chain of events that pushed Chile to the edge of collapse. By early 1973, Chile was no longer simply divided. It was unraveling. Supermarket shelves were empty. Inflation was spiraling out of control. Factories stood still. Massive protests filled the streets. Supporters of President Salvador Allende insisted the country was under attack by powerful political and economic interests. His opponents argued that his socialist experiment had pushed Chile to the brink of disaster. The nation was no longer asking whether a crisis existed. It was asking how it would end. Would democracy survive? Or was Chile heading towards something far darker? When Allende entered office, he promised a fairer Chile. His government raised wages, expanded public programs, and nationalized major industries, including the country's valuable copper sector. At first, many Chileans welcomed these reforms. Consumer spending increased. Workers celebrated. Supporters believed a new era had begun. But the early optimism did not last. Government spending surged while production struggled to keep pace. Inflation climbed rapidly. Businesses became increasingly uncertain. Basic goods became harder to find. Long lines outside grocery stores became an everyday sight. For many families, daily life turned into a struggle. As economic conditions worsened, Chile's political divisions became impossible to ignore. Supporters of Allende organized huge demonstrations in defense of the government. Opposition groups answered with rallies of their own. The streets echoed with chants, banners, and growing anger. Violent clashes became more frequent. Political compromise was slowly disappearing. Each side believed the other threatened the future of the nation. Trust between Chileans was collapsing almost as quickly as the economy itself. Then came one of the most disruptive events of the crisis, the nationwide truckers' strike. Because Chile stretches thousands of kilometers from north to south, trucks were the country's economic lifeline. When thousands of truck drivers stopped working, food, fuel, medicine, and essential supplies struggled to reach cities. Factories slowed. Store shelves emptied even faster. The strike placed enormous pressure on Allende's government. Historians continue to debate the full extent of outside financial support for opposition groups during this period. However, declassified records confirm that the United States provided funding to several anti-Allende organizations as part of its broader Cold War policy. The crisis was no longer driven by domestic politics alone. International interests had become part of the story. For decades, Chile's armed forces had been known for respecting constitutional government. Unlike many neighboring countries, the military generally stayed out of politics, but the deepening crisis tested that tradition. Some senior officers still believed the Constitution must be protected at all costs. Others quietly concluded that civilian leaders had lost control. Private conversations began taking place inside military headquarters. Rumors spread across Santiago. Would the armed forces intervene? Or would they remain loyal to the elected government? No one knew. But the balance was beginning to shift. By the middle of 1973, Chile had become a nation trapped between two futures. One path led toward negotiation, the other pointed toward confrontation. Every protest, every economic setback, every political speech pushed the country one step closer to the edge. Inside the presidential palace, Salvador Allende still believed dialogue could save democracy. But outside those walls, others had already begun preparing for a different solution. A solution that would be written with tanks, fighter jets, and gunfire. As the weeks passed, military commanders met in secret. Plans were drafted, alliances were formed. The final decision was drawing near. Then, the morning of September 11th, 1973 arrived. Within a few hours, Chile's democracy would face its greatest test. We witnessed the coup itself, the bombing of La Moneda Palace, Salvador Allende's final hours, and the rise of General Augusto Pinochet. September 11th, 1973. Before sunrise, military units quietly began moving across Santiago. Roads were sealed, radio stations were taken over, warships secured Chile's coastline. The operation had already begun. Within a few hours, an elected president would be dead, a military junta would seize power, and one of Latin America's longest democracies would come to a violent end. But what happened inside the presidential palace during those final hours? And why did Salvador Allende choose to stay when escape was still possible? This is the story of the day Chile changed forever. As dawn broke over Santiago, coordinated military forces moved into position. Army units occupied key intersections. The Air Force prepared for combat operations. The Navy secured strategic locations along the coast. Communication centers quickly fell under military control. Across the country, Chileans woke to confusion. Radio broadcasts were interrupted. Emergency announcements replaced regular programming. It soon became clear that this was not another political crisis. It was a full-scale military coup. Inside La Moneda Palace, President Salvador Allende refused to flee. Several advisors urged him to leave while there was still time. Others believed negotiations might still be possible, but Allende had already made his decision. He would remain in the presidential palace. Armed with a rifle that had become closely associated with him, he prepared to defend the constitutional government. During the morning, he delivered his final radio address to the Chilean people. His words were calm but emotional. He spoke about democracy, the Constitution, and his belief that history would ultimately judge those responsible for the coup. For many Chileans, it became one of the most memorable speeches in the nation's history. As negotiations failed, the military issued an ultimatum demanding the president's surrender. The answer was no. Shortly afterward, Chilean Air Force fighter jets attacked La Moneda Palace. Explosions shook the center of Santiago. Smoke poured into the sky. Fire spread through the historic building. Television cameras and journalists captured images that would soon be seen around the world. Inside the palace, government officials took cover as the bombardment continued. The symbols of Chilean democracy were collapsing before everyone's eyes. By the afternoon, military forces entered the heavily damaged palace. The resistance had ended. Salvador Allende was dead. Multiple official investigations conducted over the years concluded that he died by suicide during the final stages of the assault. However, for decades, speculation and competing theories surrounded the circumstances of his death. Regardless of those debates, one fact remained undeniable. The democratically elected president of Chile was gone, and with him, an entire political era had come to an end. As the fighting ended, General Augusto Pinochet emerged as the leading figure of the new military government. A military junta suspended the constitution, dissolved Congress, restricted political parties, and imposed strict censorship. Across Chile, thousands of people were arrested. Many were imprisoned, others fled into exile. Human rights organizations later documented widespread cases of torture, enforced disappearances, and political repression during the years that followed. What had begun as a single day of military action would shape Chile for nearly 2 decades. The coup was over, but Chile's darkest chapter was only beginning. The military had taken control, yet one question refused to disappear. How much responsibility did the United States bear for what had happened? Did Washington merely watch events unfold? Or did years of covert operations help create the conditions that made the coup possible? And we examine the evidence, the declassified documents, and the historical debate that continues more than 50 years later. The smoke had cleared. The bombs had stopped falling. General Augusto Pinochet now controlled Chile. But another battle was only beginning, a battle over the truth. For more than 50 years, historians, journalists, intelligence officers, and political leaders have debated one question. Did the United States simply witness the fall of Chile's democracy, or did it help make it happen? To answer that question, we must examine the evidence, not the myths. Years after the coup, thousands of previously classified American government documents were released. These records confirmed that the United States had spent years trying to influence Chilean politics. Funding was directed toward opposition groups. Anti-Allende media outlets received financial support. Political organizations hostile to the government were quietly assisted. American officials feared that a successful socialist government in Chile could encourage similar movements throughout Latin America. Their objective was clear: contain the spread of socialism, protect American strategic interests, and preserve influence in the region. The documents left little doubt that Washington was deeply involved in Chile's political struggle. Despite the released documents, one important question remains unresolved. Did the CIA directly organize the military coup of September 11, 1973? Historians remain divided. Some argue that years of covert operations, economic pressure, and political interference created the conditions that made the coup possible. Others argue that Chile's internal political crisis had already pushed the country toward confrontation, regardless of foreign involvement. No publicly available evidence has conclusively proven that American officials planned every military operation carried out on the day of the coup. What is beyond dispute, however, is that the United States actively worked to weaken Allende's government throughout the early 1970s. Following the coup, Augusto Pinochet consolidated power. Congress remained closed. Political parties were restricted. Opposition voices were silenced. Thousands of Chileans were arrested. Many were imprisoned without trial. Human rights organizations later documented widespread torture, forced disappearances, and political killings during the dictatorship. Thousands more fled the country, beginning new lives in exile across Europe, North America, and elsewhere in Latin America. For many families, the pain of those years has never completely faded. By the late 1980s, growing public pressure and international criticism placed the military government under increasing strain. In 1988, Chile held a national plebiscite. Citizens were asked a simple question: should Augusto Pinochet remain in power? The majority voted no. 2 years later, democratic civilian government officially returned. Although democracy had been restored, the country continued to wrestle with the legacy of the coup. Questions of justice, historical memory, and national reconciliation remain part of Chile's political conversation even today. The story of Chile is far more complex than a simple struggle between good and evil. Domestic political divisions were real, economic problems were real, Cold War rivalries were real, foreign intervention was real. Each played a role in shaping the events of September 11, 1973. History rarely offers simple answers. Instead, it reminds us how fragile democratic institutions can become when political polarization, economic instability, and international power struggles collide. The fall of Chilean democracy was not the result of one decision made in one room. It was the outcome of years of fear, mistrust, ideological conflict, and geopolitical competition. And that is precisely why the events of 1973 continue to be studied around the world. Final conclusion. More than half a century has passed since fighter jets flew over Santiago. The buildings have been rebuilt, governments have changed, generations have come and gone. Yet the questions raised by Chile's history still echo today. How far should powerful nations go to protect their interests? Can democracy survive extreme political polarization? And when secret operations reshape another country's future, who is ultimately held accountable? Perhaps history's greatest lesson is this: democracy is not destroyed in a single day. It weakens gradually, through division, through fear, through mistrust, until one morning, the world wakes up to find that it has disappeared. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next journey into the hidden stories of history.